I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. I don't think I can hear him.
I can't hear Mr. Paul.
Uh,
Anything? Can you hear me okay?
Oh, I can hear you now.
Oh, good, good, good. Okay. Is everybody on unmute? Feel free to unmute. And I'm not sure how many people are going to show up, but we can have it conversational and interactive. And then if it gets to be like a large number, I'll start to delineate and uh, pick questions that seem to have a common theme, or I can, or maybe of interest to me to answer as I've run into it. Does that sound okay? Okay. So how you doing, Natalie? How's things?
it's good. The weather's not that great, to be honest, but we're chugging. It's very cold. I've been like wrapping in blankets all day in my house just because I'm like, what? It's just freezing, but let's not raise the heat bill, shall we?
I'm sorry to hear that. Actually, I'm in Reno, and it's pretty nice right now. It's actually almost feels like spring.
Oh,
Not to brag, but we are the center of the world. So
that's fair. I'm glad it's nice there. Good walking weather, it sounds like.
yeah, yes, yes, indeed. So, would you like to start out with some questions?
Sure. The biggest question I think that I had was I see a lot of the work that you do.
Hmm.
See like the painting, both digital and on paper. And I
Hmm.
think my biggest question to you would be when you are switching between the two, how do you keep such consistency? Because your digital paintings,
Hmm.
I've actual paints, and I'm like, okay, I can't tell the difference here. They both were done at the same point with the same materials. So that consistency, how do you manage that?
I and let me know if I'm breaking up or camera freezes or anything like that. But when I first started in digital, one of the things I set about doing is trying to reproduce some of the effects I get with painting in the digital stuff. So it was basically a little time spent trying to do a one-to-one, or at least as close as possible. So I didn't approach the digital stuff as if it's digital. I approached it as if these are good, effective tools in this one place. What are the correlate tools here? And then what are advantages that the traditional media don't have that digital does, and how do I incorporate those? So a lot of it is still based on, like, I don't really distinguish the media too much. They're all just I need to make an image. I need to make a picture. I just want to see the picture. I see almost every tool or tool kit as a type of obstacle I have to craft to get to that image, to get to where I want to be. So if I have a set of principles of good tools in one media, I'll look at another media and go, okay, where is it here? And if they don't have it, I need something that does this. Where's that? If it's not here, I'm going to invent it. So um, it's much more. It's not so much driven by the media. I almost disregard media. I look at it like this is just my toolkit. This is just however. If this is what I have to use, this is what I'll do to put it together. So with digital, it was just basically a thing where it's like, for if I'm doing like with oil painting, how do I do my glazes? How do I do my layers? How do I do a Bister Grisaille? How do I, using blend layers, for example, or different brush types? How do I take the properties of the one thing, translate it into the other? So the consistency has more to do with what I'm demanding of the tools than what the tools are restricting me to. So I hope that didn't sound super arrogant.
That makes sense. I think the biggest struggle that I have is when I do traditional, a lot of my traditional work looks completely different from my digital work, and I've tried to get that, I guess, detail that I do in my more traditional stuff to resonate with my media, and I I don't know if it's because I haven't used it as much. I've been doing digital art for probably about 1 to 2 years now, to get into it, because I started from basically not using it at all to, all right, let's see what we can do. I seem to keep having those issues where, like, if I sketch something or if I do something in charcoal in person, I'm like, oh, this looks great. I should try to make this in digital. And then I do it there, and I'm like, wow, this looks terrible. What happened? um,
Part of it may be that there is like there's losses in either direction. I mean, you can't. There's as much as I try to make a one-to-one, there isn't. There's real losses between the two things. Like some of the advantages of digital, like the speed and iterative ability and Control Z and all that. Um, they don't have a correlate really in traditional work, but traditional work, you actually get a more tactile feel of the instrument, and you can feel the instrument evolve. Your whether it's charcoal or pencil, the tip will change, and that's it becomes a new tool. So being able to drive it in a tactile way becomes an important aspect of doing the drawing. Um, so there is a thing in digital where you have to use the grain look of the brush and try to build a feel, a substitute feel or an imitation feel for what you get on paper. So it may be that a lot of what you're doing is derived from the tactile feel, from the actual interaction of the media. the paper against pencil or charcoal against pencil.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
In other words, you're doing it wrong. Just kidding.
I mean, that doesn't sound probably too far. There's probably a lot of things I could do better. Definitely getting used to different brushes is probably a big thing
Mhm.
that I struggle with, just because I usually use maybe like two brushes on digital when I probably should be using a bunch of different ones to get different textures. But
You know what? I wouldn't really recommend. There is a thing. Um, try to think of, and this, I may do some ranting, and my views on a lot of things are sometimes not diplomatic and um, uh, friendly to a lot of the media that we use, or a lot of the brand names, or as I say, I don't actually notice or give any care to the idea of digital versus traditional, 2D versus 3D. All these partitions, they don't really mean much to me. In fact, they more often seem like advertising to try to delineate brands, or people's secret recipe tactics, that they can then do videos on and go, here's how I use my special pencil that does, it's a lot more marketing, and it misleads. Um, if you can find a good brush, or make a good brush that covers most of what you'll need to do. Like, I only use one or two brushes usually per any picture. I don't like spending my time diving around uh, this chaos of tools. If you can find one or two, almost like a pencil, it's like I don't use like the full array of, 4H to 9B when I'm drawing. I just grab a nice middle ground pencil that I can use pressure to equal out to one of those extreme ends and go to town. And it's similar in digital. You could just grab a thing that's, if you make it pretty versatile, um, and if your tablet has tilt control, you can go really far with with a single brush. Maybe here or there adding some accents with like a smoothing tool, or a blender of some sort. But I wouldn't worry about learning the different brushes so much. More maybe how to make a brush that'll give you all the things you'd ask of it.
okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because like a lot of times when I do like charcoal drawings, I'll use like one charcoal pencil, like the darkest one I
Mhm.
have, and then a blender. I use. I just go to town. I'll be like, all right, cool, and it just seems so much easier than when I've tried to do like simple drawings on digital, where I'm like, okay, I just want to blend this area, and then it becomes not the right shade that I want, or it just blends weird. So maybe making a blending pencil or something would be a good idea for me. I didn't actually think about that.
Well, there may also be like, sometimes the naming of tools is not brilliant from traditional to digital. A property of blending that you might be looking for might not be what a blending tool is giving.
Mm,
So it may be, as I say, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the naming and categories that are trying to be one-to-one digital just don't add up. And so it may be that you aren't looking for a blender that does blur this, that, or the other thing in a certain way. You may be looking for a different type of tool. So it might be that the misleading titles, or misleading descriptions, are not giving you the tools you want. It is helpful to, when doing digital, reconceive of everything. When you play with a tool, go, this is, it's named as such and such, but this is the make the scratchy marks brush. That type of thing where you can categorize it yourself, name the properties and attributes you need from it, and not necessarily follow forward with what you've been given.
okay, yeah, I probably will go in and do that because I use Photoshop a lot for when I do my digital, and some of their brushes, I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I'll test it, see what it does. Then I'll be like, that you made a squiggle line. I'm like, why can't you just call it squiggle? Like, make it simple.
Uh,
Because yeah, no,
you know,
definitely, I'll probably.
there's a program I use a lot that I recommend because I do only use two brushes in it, and it's the program Krita. It's a free drawing program, and it's pretty fantastic. And the brushes are pretty simple. You can get free brushes online, and there's some pencil sets that have enough grain and noise and angle that you can go pretty far with them. It's very similar to Photoshop. It has some blend layer capabilities that are a little more extensive, but on the whole, it's a nice program. When I went back to Photoshop after using Krita, it felt kind of clunky. You know, it felt like some of the brush things were a little like, "Oof, that's a little less like paper than I was hoping." You know, so
Right.
I'd recommend that. It might not be your cup of tea, but it's good to give a try.
Okay, yeah, I actually used Krita for 2D animation
Oh, okay.
a
Mhm.
long time ago. It's been like a year, but I use Fire Alpaca a lot as well, which is like a free program that I
Okay.
think a friend of mine suggested. But I'll have to give Krita another look because I used it on a really clunky computer that probably didn't do it justice. I had
That,
a lot of crashes with it, which is one of the reasons I ended up having to abandon it a little. But I'm
You know,
definitely
a
gonna.
while ago, I had that same thing. When I
Okay.
was using it, like in the middle of an hour's work where I was carelessly not saving as I went along, and it would just crash out of nowhere, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'll never see that picture again. That one's gone. That one's."
I totally
So,
understand.
but it's much more stable now. The last couple of releases have been greatly improved. So,
Oh, that's
yeah.
awesome. Okay, yeah, because that was like I think we I had to do oh gosh, I think there were over 80 saves of the
Mm.
variant of the as I went because I was like, all right, I'm done with this frame of animation. Just gonna save right here and save it again. But yeah, definitely I'll check it out then if it's less crashes because that was I think the biggest reason why I was just like, all right, well that was an hours of work. We're gonna put you away. Uh,
Cool. Was there any questions about any other art stuff or work things or portfolio things, anything along those lines?
Probably portfolio. I've seen a lot of obviously I've seen a lot of your work and there's a lot of really cool character sketches and I think that a lot of the characters that you make are really unique and their like silhouettes are really nice and like they're bold and they're cool. How is it that you go about making your silhouettes stand out compared to, let's say, like another artist to the point that when you look at those two pieces of drawing, it's like, oh, these are both like, let's say, magicians or wizards,
Mhm.
but this one is like, the way that his face looks or like the way that the detail is, it's so much more in depth than, let's say, like another artist.
I'm so this is gonna sound really bitter and horrible. I don't so and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions after this too, because
Okay.
I'm curious about some things about um, what art schools are teaching people right now, which I kind of look at with a little bit of a skeptical eye, if not an actually frowny face. I silhouette and any property of a drawing. So if we think of a drawing, or if we think of any piece of artwork as we're building an experience, okay? And experience is cross-modal. And any of these terms, stop me if sometimes I get a little technical in some sciency ranges and stuff. If I do, stop me and I'll explain what I'm saying. Um, our experience is cross-modal. We pull from different variables. And it gets pretty complicated. But in a lot of art school things I hear, as an old guy, as I'm talking to students, there's a lot of terms and catchphrases that are often turning molehills into mountains, you know. I never worry about or even consider silhouette at all unless there's actually the figure is in silhouette, you know, unless there's a dramatic thing where the figure is dark in front of a background. There's a bunch of other principles and properties at work having to do with how human beings project agency into an inanimate objects. There's actually a very simple set of things where you will very quickly start to understand an inanimate object as having its own being, its own entity, or its own phantom even. And that's a lot of the area I play around in when I'm doing my characters. Um, Anything once I've grabbed onto that basic set of principles of curve, line, corner, and intersections, basically some simple line work. Once I've grabbed onto that, the viewer will start to pick up and add information. A good deal of my drawings, what you think you see is actually your addition. It isn't what I've drawn. I'm just aware that if I connect a couple of shapes and angles in the right way, you're going to fill in the blanks for me and you're going to invest agency into it. So when I do a character, I'm investing enough of your agency, as far as I understand it, so that you'll wear this character. You'll fill it in with a history, you'll understand it, and you won't even question it. It's pre conscious. So I know I'm grabbing into a building block of how you experience other people, how you experience sights, what part of attention to put in where. So things like a few years ago, some of the catchphrases and terms were having to do with warm and cool. Everybody, oh, warm and cool, got to learn warm and cool. And then silhouettes started coming. Got to learn the silhouette. Silhouette, that's the key. I've heard shape language a lot lately. Shape language, we got to know the shape language. Another one is references, but not explaining how and why references are good to use and when to abandon them because they have limited use. So I wouldn't look too much at the things that are like for my work. And if you look at stuff from centuries past, I wouldn't look too much for the things that you may have heard about now in regard to what you can find in the work from then. Um, because there's been, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there seems to be a diminishment in information in terms of art, like what art can do, its extent and range. Um, and it's basically being simplified year by year. Well, you only need to do this in order to get into games, movies, VFX. You only need to know this. Don't worry about this. The things they're teaching, and some of the older, seasoned veteran artists I talk to, some of the discussions we have is basically introducing them to the things that they weren't aware are standard principles of art. Um, so I don't know. I'd look for silhouette in my work. I would look for. I'm not sure what I'd look for. You know, um,
And
go ahead.
uh, like in a way, like I guess like a more simple term to put it is that I think that your work has a lot of soul. And it's something
Hmm.
that I don't see very often. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it too, because when I look at some other arts, I see a lot of the same thing. And
Hmm.
so when I try to do like my pieces, I try to put, well, I try. Trying is the key word, but I try to put like my own, like, oh, this would be so cool, and like my own enthusiasm into it. But when your characters, like when I see them, like you were saying, all the information kind of becomes really clear. Like I see a character you draw, and I'm like, oh wow, he must be like from the underground. He does his own stuff. Like that's so cool. And I think that I'm trying to figure out how to get that reaction with my stuff as well. Like, you look at like a character, and some characters that I draw do like some fan art for, so people will be like, "Oh, I know that character," and trying to figure out how to put that soul in there without it
This is
looking too
this is
weird.
gonna be this is gonna sound weird, and it's I'm gonna be doing a course with Cave Academy in April, and it's gonna cover some of the stuff I'm talking about here in depth. But the things you just described about my work, the qualities and whatnot that you described, that's you. What I'm doing and what a lot of it is, it's like the art has the reputation for being, well, it's about me, it's about the artist, it's my expression, and I don't care about you. I have the exact opposite approach. I want you to wear characters. I want you to be able to slip into them. I want you to be able to slip into worlds that I'm making. I don't, and I want it to be so that the best stuff that happens with art is interactive between the artist and the audience. The part the audience plays is huge. The amount, like, people will look at my work and they'll say, it's so detailed. And I haven't done detailed work. They're filling in the blanks. One of the terms for this is confabulation, and it has to do with if you get a clear signal of a pattern, you will project all the other parts to it. You'll fill in the blanks, and like, I'll see people looking at my work and they go, "It's so detailed," and I'm like, "That is so scratchy." Okay, it's like that has so many gaps, but it's because there's an I'm giving an invitation with my work with enough information for you to pick up the pieces, for your brain to preconsciously pick up the pieces and invest the characters and that framework, um, and put it together so that it fits you, so that it feels like somebody's there. A couple of other things I do with it that help that is, with static images, I actually make it take place over time, because your eye flicks around a static image, it jumps to build patterns. That's also a clock of sorts, it's an animator. When your eye is jumping around, it expects the next thing it lands on to be a few parts of a second beyond where it last looked. So if you can predict that, and you know how vision works, like how somebody reads a face, you don't make the left eye the same time as you make the right eye. You make the right eye maybe a second or so after, and then you make the mouth, or part of the mouth, a second or so after that. And by building these aspects of time, which builds investment, and by making enough of a framework that you can wear the characters, it's almost allowing you to mirror or invest a surprise ghost into these other things. The property, in psychology and neurology, is called theory of mind. And what I'm doing is I'm building enough of a framework of theory of mind for you to be able to project a person or an entity and a history into that figure. So, and the tools I use to do that aren't the usual tools that they advertise, as far as like, these are the base principles of art, this is what you have to learn. I throw most of those away. They're also good tools, and I use what's necessary to build an image. But my primary tool is an expectation and some knowledge of the audience and what it is they need to see to fill a picture. So I don't know if that answered things or made it 10 times more confusing, but yeah.
No, I think I understand it. It's just it's such a different like thinking process from like what we're like being taught in school right now.
Yeah,
it's
could you give me an overview of that, or just tell me, like in general, some of the things that you're being taught?
Well, so I'm like in a game design program right now, and we don't necessarily focus on one aspect of game design. We focus on all of them. So we do art and stuff, and there are teachers that help us with it, but they push silhouette, they push really like doing like the details as much as possible, and then just like focusing on certain aspects of the body, and really they just push silhouette the whole way. Now the art teachers, they the ones that I've had have no structure. They're very, to put it lightly, artsy. um I've most of the time they just tell us to look at an image and then draw the image, and then hopefully from that exercise you learn like having the darks and stuff, which honestly, if I've learned anything, it's just that you can draw really dark pictures and do it really easily. But in terms of perspective and stuff, I haven't been really taught on that. I've been having to learn that on my own and I guess catch up. But yeah, we don't learn, I guess, the more practical skills that would be more
Well,
helpful.
it's what you're just describing there, and I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, but uh, they need to explain some stuff to you. I mean, I've worked in games quite a bit also. I mean, the things I'm describing to you as far as like how to build agency, how to use light to help guide patterns, how to build emphasis and uh, emphatic attention and direct attention and things like that. These are the principles of this. It isn't just sit down, aim somebody at a drawing and go make that. Figure out what you can from that. What they should be doing is sitting you down for 20 minutes. It's not a big process. When I'm in corporate settings, doing art direction stuff, I usually take the first 12 weeks or so, and we go through basically a fairly not super intensive, but a fairly focused. Here's what art is: building blocks to complexity. There should be a thing where they're showing you the anatomy of light as you'll perceive it. Everything from contrast value, light decay, the types of reflectance and absorbing light. It only takes a couple of minutes. You can do it in a chart. It's like I'll send you, in LinkedIn, I'll send you a chart I already have built up of it.
Okay.
um, it's just a thing you walk through really really quick, and you do a demonstration so the students can see how easy it is to start to make something simple, and then it blossoms into something dimensional or having characteristics, as in like understandable motives. It isn't some, I mean, it irritates me a little to hear you say this, that it's basically, and it's something I've heard quite a bit. They should be teaching you more. They
Yeah.
should be teaching, and they should be teaching you in a very organized way, so that it can. The more organized you're taught a thing, the more that organization cascades down everything you do. So it's like taking the time to show you a few stepped things. It As these get very complex, you can still keep things in order. Um, yeah, that's not good. Do you ever feel comfortable pushing back and outraging
I
against these classes and saying, hey, I'm not paying you to tell me to go teach myself.
Yeah, well, and I know I sent you my portfolio on there. All of the stuff
Mhm.
I've done on there is stuff that I've learned on my own time because they have not taught me how to do a lot of things that I genuinely I need to know. And I have tried to like go in private sessions with like the professors that I have and be like, "Hey, this is great that we're doing this, but can you like teach me how to do this? Because I actually need to know this." I did a one of the drawings I have on there was it has a cityscape in the background, and I was trying to do more 3D style cities and do a really cool perspective. I didn't know how to do perspective. So I was like, "All right, we're gonna try this." And it did not go well because I looked and tried to get references and everything, and I was like, "I don't know where I'm supposed to start." And I was able to get help from one of my professors, but it wasn't a part of our main lessons at all. It
Okay,
wasn't covered. And like
that,
so
that's
it was
really not okay.
yeah.
And it's not okay because there's two things that happen with perspective that are I sometimes the term perspective I'm not thrilled with because it's misleading. But there's two aspects of it that are super important to any image you're going to do for humans. And one has to do with time, and the other has to do with distance and depth. There's a saying that form change equals value change. And that's basically that, the value scale, the smooth gradient of black to white. When you put that on an image, those smooth gradients and their variations next to each other give us a sense of 3D. Okay. Um, there's a similar property with depth and distance. Um, Distance change or proximity change equals interest change. Okay, so things far away are not as interesting to us as things up close. And there's actually like stepped distances that you can, like, if it's a person, um, uh, it's like a person at different distances from you will be of different importance to you. Okay, you'll affiliate with them differently. That's true of environments as well. It's like a car way down the street is not as interesting or urgent as the speeding car about 3 feet from you. Okay. So the other part is that in a picture, one of the things that allows us to embed time into static images is the movement of your eye. And these are called saccades, and they land on foveal fixations, the point of focus where your eye lands. Um, when you're using perspective to guide fixations. You're timing how people are looking around a picture, an image, a 2D image. And this can also be fudged in 3D. You don't have to stick with, you can mess around with cameras, scale, and so on in a 3D thing to fudge and make hyper real points of interest. So they should be teaching not just perspective like, hey, how do we make that distant? They should be teaching the suite of the properties of depth and distance and where it interacts with time, because that's how you make an interesting picture. And in video games, it's needed. It is a real need. Um, it is a thing. Like, it's surprising they aren't going through this and walking through this with you in a real way. Basically, the stuff they sometimes teach in grade school, the 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 point perspective, but then the other tricks of perspective where you have 30 different perspective points in one picture that's guiding the eye to look in 30 different places in a timed, ordered way. Um, that they aren't teaching that is like,
Yeah. Well, and I'm a junior right now and I'm about to become a senior, and I don't after this I really don't have any more art classes. I've taken all the ones that I need to do besides digital classes. So at this point whether or not the next like classes I'm going to be taking are going to help me with that, I'm unsure, but the what you just talked about is something that I've been trying to learn kind of on my own free time after consulting some other people within the industry because they've talked about it with me, and I was like, you do what? And they were like, yeah, this is kind of how we do stuff. I was like, oh no. And I've been looking at other artists who are also in the industry, and I see the points around the picture that kind of lead you. And I was like, this has never been mentioned to me before. Wonderful. And so I've been trying to make more images and really figure that out for myself for my own pictures. But genuinely, yeah, like I haven't. I just heard about it probably maybe 6 months ago, and that's when I realized, and I was like, I'm.
Well, Natalie, I gotta say, there's a lot of these principal things, these baseline things. They're fast to teach. Also, they're not. It isn't like they're going to have to take a full semester to walk you through this. It's very easy. Your study around it'll probably take the rest of your life, like it does with everybody. But just walking you through and giving you the starter kit will jump you ahead crazy amounts very quickly. Like the dramatic transition from your work, um, from day one, and learning these basic points of knowledge to 12 weeks later is dramatic. It's like when I have students who do this, uh, they're expecting it to be much more difficult at the first. In fact, they're like, I didn't learn anything until it snaps. And then they go, oh, it's just this. And it's like, yeah, it's just that. You know,
Oh.
it's like the mystical art edifice where terminology like silhouette or perspective are nearly scare words. It's like, this is all pretty, the principles and the toolkits and the fundamentals and all those things, that's the easy stuff. The dealing with the audience and preparing a world for them, developing experiences for them, that's the difficult toolkit. There's two packages of tools. One is the how do you use your media and how do you make your media imitate uh, space and things like that. And then there's the part of, okay, now we're interacting with the audience and we're building worlds, we're building histories, we're building the hyper real or the extraordinary experience. That's the tough part. The learning your media and craftsmanship is, it's something you'll do throughout your life, but it's much easier than the cognitive toolkit, which is like, okay, how am I interacting with an audience? How am I clothing them appropriately so that they can live in this world? What skin am I giving them so that they can appropriately experience something that they can't actually experience in the world? You know, so they're really. uh, I'll go yell at your instructors for you. I'll write them an angry email. Um, it's a troubling thing for me. It's kind of a, I don't know the solution for it, but they should be doing better. And you can tell them I said so.
I'll keep on chugging. That one person not telling me something, I'll find out eventually, and I'll master it either way. But we'll get there. It's
Good.
just it's really just catching up, I guess. Because I know that there are some things in my art that I think are really basic that I just don't entirely understand because either had to learn it in a really quick time or I like learned it and I was like, okay, and then I didn't use it for a while and then I forgot about it. I was like, oh no, come back, I need that. So yeah, I will get to it. But yeah, it can be a little frustrating sometimes because I do wish there was a little more structure because you kind of expect a like sections like okay we're gonna do this and then we're gonna do this and these two things build into this. In reality they're like all right see that building over there, draw that. And I'm like okay.
You know what works even better is if the instructor just draws for you, basically shows you how easy it is to accomplish the thing they've discussed. And
Okay.
also doing a couple of collabs, like if you send over a picture and they do a paint over in front of you and show you how few steps, like there's a problem that students, well, I'm not a big fan of critique. I don't like the philosophy of it and I don't think it's super effective. Tearing down somebody's work does not help them build to the next step. However, if you can show them the bridge to the next steps, that goes really far, and it also doesn't demoralize. If instructors take the work of their students and draw it themselves, invest in how to get to the accomplishment in front of the student and describe and say, hey, you've got 90% of this right. The 90% needs these tweaks in configuration to make it snap, okay, uh, to make it wearable, okay. And if when you walk through and you say, okay, uh, here's the missing parts. Let's walk through them. There's 6 of them. They work like this. Boom, 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 boom. Then the student knows, or the mentee knows, that it's like, oh, all the work I put into this wasn't a waste. It just needed a slight tweak to get to where it needs to be. Um, Instead, it's like aiming you at a thing on your own and going, okay, now go do that. Go study that. Go study what? Could it has to be assumed the student is blind to certain aspects of what you're talking about. And you walk through and you ask them, when you're showing them, you basically go, is what I'm saying making sense? Is there any questions you have on here? What part isn't clear? We'll focus on that for maybe 5 minutes. And you can time box it like that. You can say, we're going to take 5 minutes and just look at this thing and sort it. And I haven't seen that happening nearly at all. I've seen a lot of, I hear like things about go teach yourself how to, or go do a self-study course. What do you go to school for if it's self-study? I can do that at home. Why would I need an expert to hang around somewhere um, if it's going to be so troubling? Oh,
Right.
let me answer a question real quick here to Purva. It's the topic is a mix for basically young artists. The question is, I'm sorry if I misunderstood the topic, but was this session meant for students? If so, I may be in the wrong Zoom session. It's for students, but also emerging artists and young professional artists. Um, I hope that answered the question properly. So yeah, if it's more looking for an advanced thing, we can cover some of those things too. It probably wouldn't hurt to go over some of that as well. But yeah. So, and Natalie, is it okay if I jump over and Naomi had sent me a couple of questions also, and I want to see if I can cover those too.
Yeah, of course.
Hi, can you hear me?
Naomi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Ah, frazzled, but
Okay.
we're trucking. I don't know if I told you this, but like Natalie and we're in like the same program, and a lot of the things that she's been asking and saying are kind of things that I wanted to go over too.
Okay.
Um, I think the main thing that I wanted to ask you was that, sorry, I'm scatterbrained. Um, I have been developing my portfolio for the last like 2 years in college now, and I've noticed that I have been drawn to character art and concept art for my focus, and I have this weird, like, I guess, cartoony art style that I've gotten really comfortable in, but I'm looking to expand into more realism with digital painting and with like kind of similar to how like League of Legends characters are drawn with like the digital painting and the more realism. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how to start getting into that kind of thing when I don't have very much of a background in it.
Yeah, actually, I have a kind of a quick fix at first. Have you heard of the artist Sam Nielsen?
The name sounds familiar, but it's not ringing a clear bell right now.
Okay, he does a course on schoolism. He does fantastic work, really beautiful stuff. Um, he does a course on schoolism, 2 courses, one on the fundamentals of light, and I think storytelling with light is the other one. I would give those a look at, and because they're really good. They're really, really good. And he can uh, like some of the things you're looking for with like League of Legends, and some of that has to do with how light and form building are used. So it's like using real light models on cartoon proportions and cartoon characterizations. So it adds some realism and real beauty to some of those pieces. So I'd check that out. As far as the adding more realism, I always suggest a couple of things that may not sound like they make sense altogether. I would suggest studying anatomy, which might be an obvious one. Um, at first, just with the eye to get familiar with structures. I'd also start a workout program. Um, uh, so that, oh, sorry. I'd start a workout program in front of a mirror so that you can actually see and feel how things work. There's a real connection there. You know, they say neurons that fire together wire together, and you want to be able to connect what you understand of drawing a thing to how it feels. So if you're picking up something heavy, you want to be able to intuit where the strain, the pull, how balance is arranged in terms of your personal experience of it, how you felt it, how you had to plant your feet, whether or not you lost your breath trying to pick up a thing, things along those lines. Um, so you'll want to do those two things together: work out so you can feel it, work out so you can see it and relate to it, and then look at how the mechanisms and the actual mechanical pieces of a body work, so that you can start to, instead of just drawing is also feeling. You have to feel how the characters are going to be. You have to know the angles of feeling. And instead of it being like, I'm going to look at an image of someone and do a drawing of someone, if you enact it, you will get much more information out of that. So sometimes being your drawings can help you draw figures more realistically. Again, the other part would be learning light and how the anatomy of light, or how light works and how we read it. And Yeah, I think that might cover it with those guys as a starter. So yeah,
All right, thank you. That's very helpful.
no problem. Ed, let me see. Perv asked a question. Could you please elaborate on art styles that are non-game related, oriented for professionals? Also, any tips for mastering hyper-realistic life drawings would be appreciated. Okay. There's a couple of thoughts on that. Uh, Non-game related art, well, there's some things there, and also having to do with style. Style is, and I know it gets a lot of play in terms of people talking about um, style as a benefit, or this is their style. Style is lossy. It's saying something is incomplete and has had to exaggerate some features at the loss of other features. Um, so game styles, because games were built up of difficulty using systems, the difficulty of being able to put really elaborate lighting or really elaborate frame rates, really thorough frame rates into an image. Um, those parts inhibited some of the styles and directed game styles. That's becoming less of a thing. At the moment, they're actually diving into some hyper real, and for those of you involved with games, you'll probably have seen the Unreal Engine's release recently of character building and animated, fully functioning, uh, fully expressive characters. So old game styles were limited by the technology. New game styles are actually becoming closer to cinematic effects. But mastering like hyper-realism in anything, even traditional work, as well as how it might contribute to video games and movies. Um, there, one of the things has to be to get away from the idea of photorealism. Photos don't offer realism. Humans don't see things in snapshot. Humans see things according to time release. The way our eyes move around, we have two major um, uh, eye movements that dictate how we're using our brain functioning. There's saccades, which are snaps, and they have to do with ventral reasoning. And there's the top front part of the brain, and then there's smooth pursuit, which is dorsal reasoning. Um, to give a sense of real or the hyperreal, that perception of reality, there is an interplay between how you're setting up how people are reading and attentive to features. Part of that has to do with distortion. So to make something real or hyperreal in traditional drawings, even, it involves distortion. It involves elongation of limbs. It also involves knowing where key points like shoulders, joints, usually your eye will use as beacons to flick. This may sound a little complicated, but I'll jump in with it. When your eyes are moving, when they go from fixation to fixation in saccades, they shut off data. You shut off visual information. So when your eye hits one spot, jumps to the other, this middle ground isn't taking in sight. What it does is it confabulates. It goes, we'll stitch something in together with that. It dreams for a second. You use a dream to meet the other fixation point. Um, uh, just reading your question there, Purva. So when you are doing a figure, you have to understand that your eye has jumped from like shoulder to elbow, and it isn't a cohesive line. So you can do things like stretch the distance from a shoulder to an elbow um, longer than it would be if you were to measure somebody and you were to measure the arm in ratio. Um, Stretching things adds a time sense and a greater reality or feeling of reality for an audience. The other thing you can do is, instead of it being like, if you think of here's here's a shoulder, here's an elbow, and instead of having them linear, you can actually angle one up, because it takes time for your eyes to fixate to the other, and a being in motion will change angle a bit. So you can distort and blend angle distortions and length distortions, um, not too far, but enough that people will start to invest. Hey, this thing was on the move. It starts to give them more reality, a feeling of reality, because you've added some time and a sense of motion in a static image. The other thing is, like, for traditional work, I think my camera froze. For traditional work, is to make sure that the lighting you're using, if it's a black and white picture, charcoal or pencil or whatnot, that you are using good light models, very convincing light models, because if you use those, you can help those transition and hide your distortions. But also, you can use those to fake line, to fake information and exaggerate information where muscle is being used and whatnot, so that the viewer can invest even further. If they can get the sense that they feel the exertions or relaxation, or a languid pose versus a tensed pose, if you can give them muscle signatures and accent those with maybe a little darker than it would be in reality, or a little more highlit or shinier, those add to the feeling of reality, even though they've departed from physics. Okay. So to add reality and hyperreality to pictures, you actually have to break away from the things that we usually use as a standard, um, uh, like photoreal. Photos are a good resource to understand aspects of mechanisms and shapes and whatnot, but they don't help in the parts of understanding motion, focal distance, in terms of importance and attention. The next question on that is, and Perfect, feel free to turn on your mic and ask away. And if you have any questions, we can interact that way too. Um, any tips on getting foreshortening correct? Yeah, there's one major tip I have, which is draw back to front. Instead of like if you know, if my hands are like this and you want to draw this, start from what you imagine here is and build forward. March your information forward. That's also going to take some anatomy study. Um, it will take understanding the shapes of muscle and angle, like understanding that, like, I'll use my hand as like an angle gauge. So even though my fingers are here, this part of my forearm back here angles up here and squares. So it's like, okay. So you have to understand the different geometric shapes that are marching forward and occluding one another. That helps a great deal. Breaking down into simple geometries can simplify the initial drawing, but it will evolve, and you'll need to jump into learning the actual anatomy. The problem is we have, and you can go to the cave paintings in France forward. Human beings tend to like to see things face. For when we look at animals, that's in profile because that's the majority of the animal. We like to see the biggest mass of a thing that we can, you know. When you're doing foreshortening, you know, a hand like this is showing the face of the hand. You know, doing it like this, you're showing a bunch of little faces, you know, a bunch of, you're adding a multitude of faces stacked on each other. So it makes it difficult to conceive of because we do like to emphasize and put importance on the flattest, easiest, straightforward surface. When you're doing foreshortening, you have all kinds of weird angles of things, faces and half faces. Um, it makes it difficult to put together in a simple way. You will have to get into the anatomy pretty in depth to understand the twisting of the muscle, where all these things lead, the anchoring of the muscle and where the muscle is directed, where the bone is dictating the shape, where bone is contradicting muscle flow. So it's like there may be a thing where if you're flexing, the muscle will suddenly change the shape of what you're working on. It's a pretty complicated issue. I'm not sure there's any clear tip to work with except giving it a straight try, uh, just studying it through. That said, it does, once you've started, like if you do studies of yourself or friends or someone in person, you'll notice that ways to adapt to foreshortening, because when you're drawing it, you're not going to sit and draw straightforward. You're actually going to orbit and hover around while you're drawing. And that's something that you can actually add in a drawing. Sometimes unwrapping makes images look more realistic because it also imitates how we examine a thing in time. So I don't have any clear shortcuts on that guy, or even like shortcut tips. It's pretty hard, but once you get it, it allows you to do a bunch of other like um, uh, proximity telescoping, you know. I hope that answered the question. Okay.
That was super helpful. Thank you so much.
No
I just have
problem.
one quick question though. So a follow-up question. So for example, when we're doing a life drawing, well, pre-COVID, if I'm measuring with a needle for the life drawing session, then if I'm measuring for the foreshortening part of it, would I still do the standard process of like measuring starting from the shoulder, for example, but then just visualize those as abstract shapes instead of thinking of it as a shoulder?
Um,
Like,
uh,
how
me-
would you measure that on a model if there's like foreshortening of, like, for example, when you placed your hand towards the camera? So
mhm.
how would you, seeing it from a perspective, like, for example, if I'm standing like in front of you looking at the hand, how would I
Mhm.
then start measuring it with the needle?
Um, can I ask, and this is going to sound like a weird question. What, and yell at me if you want to. What,
No worries.
why would you measure it?
Well, because when I do live drawing, I usually prepare like a rough thumbnail
Mhm.
first and then put that thumbnail into like larger proportions on paper. So when I'm transferring from the thumbnail version to the larger proportions, I tend to make sure that the measurements for proportions are accurate.
Do you want to
That's
know
the
an
part.
interesting thing? This may be a little bit off, and I
Yeah.
don't. The things you're learning in this traditional thing are traditional and effective. Okay,
Yeah.
like doing the measuring stuff. There's another route that's also valid, um, uh, which has to do with, so like some of the stuff is to keep you from going into distortion, from distorting in crazy ways, right? The act of measuring is to keep things well ordered and whatnot. Um, but why do we do those distortions? What is it why aren't we seeing a one-to-one measurement with the things we're looking at and trying to reproduce? Part of the reason we distort, especially humans, but we do this doing animals too, is
Mm-hmm.
because we're infecting it with our own body maps. On the surface of your brain,
Right.
you cortical maps. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's not bad, because the way you're distorting it, I think my video froze again. Sorry about that. The way you're distorting it is a way that the picture can be and allows for the audience to invest time into what you're doing. So if it may not look like your reference, or it may not be a one-to-one with your reference, but distortions are also good tools. So it may be that and this is just a suggestion, um, some of these distortions, especially your particular distortions, where you distort consistently, might not be a bug but a feature. you know it might be a thing that, one, how you're reading a model, you're going to infect them with some of your information and
Yeah.
information in the moment, and you
Yeah.
might want to keep those, because those caricatures, those distortions, will guide your audience to think of the model in a certain way too. It won't be exact, it won't be to measure, but it will be experiential. You're already
Right.
giving your audience several steps into the experience to go,
Yeah.
"Ah, I get where this is going." It is, but I don't want to discourage you from the other part though, because it is super important to do the exercise of the precision work too, so that you know where and when you want to use it, where you want to throw it away
Yeah.
and where you keep it.
Yeah.
So
It's like learning the rules so I can like bend the rules,
yeah, or at least
and modify them as needed.
or maybe a modification of that, trying the rules and going, this isn't a rule, because you can see
Yeah.
around it and note there are other things that, if I take part of that and mix it with this, I got a new tool,
Yeah.
so I'd recommend, I tend to balk at at measures because it's restricting like that, because it's like the
Yeah.
story that you individual, your idiosyncratic sense of space is going to help me fill out your picture. It's going
Right.
to help you be in your picture. And I don't
Yeah.
want to, like, I'll be honest, I love the craftsmanship of traditional art, but it has gotten so bland. It's like so blandy bland. It's like all the
Yeah.
character and storytelling are being robbed because the artist is dismissing themselves. And it's like, no, 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 I need you in there.
Yeah.
It's like, put you in there so I can be in,
Yeah.
so that's just a thought. That's just me evangelizing my point of view. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But yeah, so in terms of like perspective and like trying to get point measures, um, there's a few different ways to get the measures right. It's like doing something like this, doing an XY measure, down the length of things and going, okay, XY here is good, XY here is good, XY here, and so on, with peaks that can be seen. Um, uh, Again, when as I'm saying that, I'm like, oh, that there's parts of that that wouldn't be ideal as far as I'm thinking of it. Like the if you want to add time distortion to a 2D image, um, having the back of the shoulder and the elbow at slightly different times, or having the fingers and the elbows even inconvenient pieces, helps give over time. Like I don't
Could you
know.
give an example of how I would make them at a different time?
Sure. Um, you know what? I may have a picture of this somewhere. Let me pull up an image, and I'll show you a picture I did to break. I'm gonna navigate to this real quick. Breaking bones, basically, and breaking pieces to give over. And it's a picture of Santa, just to warn you.
No worries.
Okay, let's open all these. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen here real quick, and we'll go to Photoshop. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes, it's very clear.
Okay. So this was the original image. Okay. And so it's like shoulder, elbow, elbow, wrist. Okay. And this is what I've done. So it's a straight line here, but at the arm, I actually break the arm. I take the linearity of the arm and I don't keep it linear, because I know that joints tend to be beacon spots for fixation. So I'm aware that from here to here, one of the reasons that's the case is when you look at a joint, it's a bundle. It's almost like a spherical area of information. And from that come tangents, linear tangents going in a direction. So it makes it easy for the brain to go, oh, it's like, let me get my pointer out. That's good. So it's easy for a brain to go, okay, I can see this. I'm going to infer an angle here. And I'm going to jump and scan until I get to the next part that I know of, the next joint. And I'm going to infer that angle because I'm not going to bother taking this in. So we're blind for about 4 hours a day in this loss of information as our eyes move. This blind spot gives us time. So your eye moving from here to here is a span of time, and it's blind in that time. It's going to make up the difference. So what I do, like in this picture, is I've broken his arm. It at first glance, like as you and I examine this, we're seeing that it's like, oh, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. But that's because I've added a new point of fixation by pointing it out. Otherwise, it seems pretty close. Everything seems okay. And then what's more is I've also exaggerated and upscaled the hand to indicate that not only is the arm in motion from elbow to wrist, but that the viewer has gotten maybe a little closer. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
that makes a lot of sense.
so I've broken space parts and time parts in snapshot, but not in how humans interact in space. Okay. So here's without that. Here's the actual fixed thing as if I hadn't switched those. And I think you can automatically feel a difference between them. Like here his hand's fairly proportional, all the joints are okay, but he's a lot stiffer. He's a lot less interesting. Whereas with something like this, I'm telling the audience, I'm like saying, hey, he's in motion. I want you to understand that he's a guy doing stuff. But I also want
Yeah,
you to focus in on some details as if you leaned in to look at it. So I do tend to also add more detail to those spots too, for detail. And when people look at something in detail, there's a painter named Davids. I think he was 16th century Dutch, and he did this brilliant painting that when you're fairly far back, you look at it, it's a bowl of fruit and a couple of flowers, if I'm remembering it right. And it's super, you can see from a distance, it's super highly detailed. And as you close in step by step, the picture changes because there's a new layer of detail the closer you get, until by the time you're right up on the painting, the fruit's rotting and it's covered with insects. So because you're far back, he's like playing with detail time. So he's using details so that when you're sitting back, you're like, hey, what the, oh my, wait, what's going on? So that's another way of using time also, is using detail, because people will take more time to
yeah,
sort out things. You're actually embedding another time signature in what they're doing. So those are a couple of ways uh, that you can add time to a piece. In foreshortening, it's much the same. If you make an uncomfortable elbow angle, if you use the angles of the hand and break them, if you say, okay, where are my fixation points? Where are the tangent angles? Because again, we like to see faces, we like to see flats. You know, Flat is easy. Where are the flats? How do they connect to the next flat? And how do I angle that up a bit? How do I distort, twist, and maybe make it a little larger? So, yeah. So, so that's what do you think? Was that a reasonable answer?
yes, that was very helpful because the visual example was very helpful in like clarifying the concept of time on a static image. Thank you
Isn't
so
that
much
neat?
for that.
That
Yeah,
stuff is so cool. I love that
yeah.
stuff.
Because usually when we think of time, it's more related to like animation time or like moving time, but very rarely do people
Well,
speak or even introduce the concept of time in static images,
you want me to
even
show
though
you
it's
something?
there.
There's a neat thing. Let me show it to you real quick, and hopefully it works out on your screen. I'm going to show you something, and this is how. So your eye is actually an animator all the time, which is why I worry about artists uh, using snapshots, using photographs. And I am a big fan of photography. Um, my dad's a photographer, and I kind of grew up around it. But with photography for drawlators, there are some real boundaries and some areas that are not ideal for us. Photographs approach time in a different way than we do. And one of our aspects of seeing, our eyes are an animator. And I mean that pretty literally. I'm going to share screen again and show you something weird. And tell me if that, just a little bit, so that at a certain point you'll start to see those objects move. Can you see that okay?
Yeah,
And the reason that's moving is because you have saccades, your eye flicks, and you have microsaccades. and you can't really shut those off. The time they shut off is when your eyes are doing smooth pursuit. And that's a different, that actually sets up, there's an interesting part about all of this, which is when you're looking at a static image and your eye is doing the saccades, that also is a gear shift in cognition. You're using more logic, more understanding of sequence and history, and you're pulling from the past and building a pattern as you go. Smooth pursuit does something different. Smooth pursuit is like watching a cheetah across the landscape and you're tracking it. You can't fake smooth pursuit. It's a reflex that you can't, like actors can't imitate it. But it's very lossy. Um, and when you're watching the cheetah, imagine watching a cheetah across a landscape. The landscape's blurry. Parts of the cheetah are blurry. You're only getting like this kind of, you're going, I know that's a cheetah. But the problem with these two types of thinking, one's the ventral cognitive system and one's the dorsal. There's different senses of conviction, different sense of realism and what's true. With saccadic motion and like your eye is an animator, your brain is actually doing a different type of conviction and confidence. How confident you are in what you're seeing is less exaggerated than when smooth pursuit is going on, which is a predictive model. You're gambling. And the more smooth pursuit, the more of that predictive model you go in, the more inflated and uncertain, the more inflated and less reliable your sense of confidence should be. You actually get things aren't clearing, even though your confidence level is saying, yeah, we're really sure. Your information to make you really sure is getting less and less and iffier and iffier. You're being led by a will o' the wisp almost. So when your eyes are the animator, you're actually in a different brain state than when you're watching something and things are happening very quick. So we're not, when we're doing drawings, when we're setting up an image, we aren't just giving over something as simple as an image. We are taking people's minds and putting them in different cognitive states that last after they've seen the picture for quite some time. It takes a little while to adjust. So we're some of the things we're doing is not just making pretty images. We're rewriting identity, memory, time sense. It's very dramatic what we're actually doing when we do a drawing. It's pretty intense, and there's actually ethical discussions that need to be brought into doing art and presenting art, because you can mess people up. You can, over an extended time, you can really distort people's sense of things, which is where propaganda comes in, and personality cults and cults that suppress and rebuild a new fictional world. So these time distortion things and these visual things, they're fairly old tactics. Neurology is casting new light on them, but they've been in play for a couple thousand years at least. So yeah. Sorry, Purva, I'm going to jump. Did you have any other questions, Purva?
No, I think I'm good. Thank you so much.
And am I saying your name right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to
welcome.
answer Quincy real quick. I think it was Quincy. Paul, you may have answered this. Where did you learn this approach? Studying different things and experimenting, for the most part. I'm a big fan of neurology, and I actually, there's sometimes I'm asked, what do you need to study or learn to do art? Everything. It used to be like in the Renaissance, artists were understood to be polymaths, or students of everything, and I think that's still the case. I often hear artists talk about, well, I just want to do art. Art's actually not, art's a description of how you're providing and manifesting the extraordinary experience. You have to learn everything else as far as you can, um, as far as your aptitudes allow to create that experience. So it's in order to learn to do art, you have to study everything else. A lot of the stuff I've learned has to do with studying science and history and looking at a lot of it is watching people, people watching and reading on psychology and then trying to work out parts of that. Um, I spend a lot of time observing how people are looking at works of art. You know, I'll sit there and examine them while their eyes are scanning around a thing, and then I'll look up and see if there's any scientific work on this that can explain it a little bit more or fill in details that I'm not picking up. So yeah, there's everything. Every study anything you can. Yeah. So did anyone else have any questions? And feel free to jump in on mic or ask in the chat. And if you don't, I'm just going to start singing. I don't care. This is my moment to shine. Just kidding. I'm not doing that.
Can I actually ask one more question?
No, Natalie, God.
Ah,
No, please do.
okay. I wanted to ask. So, I know Naomi had mentioned doing like the realistic painting earlier. What would you suggest? Since I feel like I'm not really getting the resources I need to, because like my professors don't really draw in front of me that often. Would you suggest maybe looking up like what is it, like speed draws or stuff like that, to watch other people draw to kind of get that experience, or do you suggest just trying to do that on my own and then see if I can get my professor to draw in front of me?
Uh,
Because
let
that's
me,
the
that brings up a couple of questions to me. Um, have you seen your professor's works?
yes. So my professor currently does realism drawings,
Mhm.
um, but we're doing a virtual class because of COVID. But he doesn't draw in front of us really. He just kind of tells us what to do. So he'd be like, "Okay, I want you this week to draw hands." But he won't really give us example of hands. He'll like go to other artists and be like, "Okay, see the hands that they did? Try to do something like that." And then when we don't really get critiques on our work, so we'll send in our work and he'll just kind of grade us based on what he thinks is good. And then
So
from there, we just go to class. The only thing he really critiques is our projects, and those are the bigger ones. I think I actually sent you that larger drawing I sent you was one of the projects that we had to do, and the only direction that we had for that was draw something and try to make it realistic.
Okay. Well, if you want, like, we can take. There's about a half hour I have set up for this left. If you want, we can take and we can do some drawing. We can basically do a mini class, if that's interesting to anyone, um, uh, and go over some things that might be pretty simple and easy to look over that might answer some questions and give some direction if you want to do that.
Okay, that would be great.
Cool. I'm going to answer Perva real quick here. She asked to share any books or references for studying anatomy. Um, yeah. Um, what's the name of it? There. So depending on how strong your stomach is, there's a few photographic anatomy books that are dissections. Um, they can be a bit rough. Uh, I've been studying them for a couple of decades now, and some days it's fine. I'm like, oh, I'll just study that. Other days I can't get through the book. So it's like depending on your gross level, I would recommend, if possible, going and taking an anatomy class. If you don't want like a real medical anatomy class. If that's not available, there are a number of books. I'll Let me take a look real quick. There's a couple I might be able to name fast. Um, let's see. You know what? Yeah. Let me start that. Okay. The one of them is the sorry, it's pulling up. Anatomy of Facial Expressions, and I think the author's name is, I don't remember, Aldous Zarin. Another book is Paul Richards' Artistic Anatomy. That one's line art, and it's always nice. Um, uh, Let me see. Then there's the Atlas of Anatomy, and which is I don't remember the authors on that, but I think it's one of the first. If you search that one out, they do, I think, fairly yearly editions. And that one's the Atlas of Anatomy, and then there's the Atlas of Human Anatomy, and they're both photographic anatomy surveys. Um, Elliot Goldfinger's book on human anatomy, that one's a good one. There's some parts of it that you'll see. It is simplified. It is simplifying structures, and it is a good way to examine stuff. The models that he uses can be not necessarily exemplary, or they're definitely specialized. Like how you would see their builds to an average person or out of average person even, there's going to be a big difference. The other anatomy, again, that I would recommend is workouts with a mirror, getting to see things in motion, and even getting to go, wait a minute, how does that work? What is that machine? Um, it's very helpful. And also your somatosensory system, your mechanosensory system, any way that your brain has to feel the space and movement of your body and pressure, is an additive part of drawing. There was an experiment done on kittens, sadly, that two kittens were at the same age were in the experiment. One was carried for several weeks after birth, and the other one was allowed to explore its environment. Um, After the set number of weeks were up, I think it was 3 weeks, the kitten that was carried was set down, and it was effectively blind for the rest of its life, because our visual system and our tactile systems are intimately linked, deeply linked. It's why we infect drawings with how we look. It isn't because we've seen ourselves in the mirror so much, it's because our brain has set our spaces particularly. When you're drawing, you're not just drawing from sight, you're pulling from your body's sense of space and how you pilot your body, how you wear your body. So a real reference is you, and moving and seeing you move and using yourself as an anatomical model. So, all right. So what do you think, Natalie? Should we? Yeah, and if everybody else is okay with the quick drawing session, if that works for you. I'll go ahead and jump into that. Let's do this guy. Okay. Can everybody see that one okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it as well.
And if you guys wouldn't mind, whoever'd like to participate, turning on your mics, and feel free to call out questions or things as we're going. Questions, commentary, anything along those lines, it'll help guide me to be able to explain anything we might run into. So feel free to jump in and participate at will. And also let me know if my screen freezes or anything like that. So let's... And I'd appreciate it if nobody makes fun of any weird faces I make. I'm only human. Unless you really want to. If it's a good joke, knock yourself out. Hey, Purva, do you see where I'm taking the saccadic focal points and I'm building around those guys primarily? The pose I'm doing here is just kind of a general contrapposto pose. Sorry about that. Natalie, do you have any questions on any of this part so far, or parts you'd like me to explain?
Your quickness about doing like figuring out where things are, is that just come with like time and knowing the anatomy?
Yes, but it also, like, it took forever to figure out that I want to be lazy. You know, that being lazy might be the key. So it's like a lot of the things like doing the joints and knowing their saccadic keys or saccadic beacons. Um, that part, it shortcuts everything because it also, when you're drawing, it works on you. You know, you start building and inferring details. You know, so what I'm doing is it's fast, but it's also the property of laziness, or as I like to call it, elegance.
Okay, I see.
And there's things here like some of the exaggerations I'm making, like a pretty common one I like to do, and only if I'm forced will I, like if the picture really demands it, I like to make arms a bit long because we do use those as very persistent tools and put a lot of concentration into them. We don't just They aren't just tools. We actually focus on them quite a bit. So making them longer and more exaggerated actually gives the feels a bit better. It gives a point of exaggerated clarity and importance in regard to other features where we don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Okay.
Part of this has to do with how we inhabit and give agency to different aspects of our body at different times. So it's like there's a little test where if you close your eyes and put your finger and your thumb on both sides of your nose and close your eyes. Um, are you doing it?
Yes.
This isn't a trick, but use your index finger and feel your nose, and then use your thumb and feel your nose, and then use your nose to feel your finger and thumb, and you're switching basically focal points of agency. Um, but you probably weren't aware of what your middle toe on your right foot was doing at the time. You've kind of robbed other parts of agency in order to inhabit the focal parts. And by setting up exaggerations and cueing an audience to understand that they should invest more in certain parts than others, you're kind of giving that effect. You're saying, hey, inhabit more of your understanding of how you inhabit a body because I'm giving you more information on it.
Mm, okay. And how do you? I feel like when you were making kind of the generalized shape, is that also a part of the process of making sure that everything is proportional as well? Like I usually make my heads a little too big, and so I have to like go back and usually resize them.
When you say too big, what do you mean? And the reason I ask
So
again is does it look right in compare, or is it too big in comparison to something? Like independently, could it be a go, or does it look too big in regard to a reference?
so if it's by itself, like and it doesn't have a body, it
Mhm.
obviously it looks fine. But when I draw my bodies, oddly enough, my bodies will be proportional to themselves. So the arms will be proportional to the chest, and the legs will be good. And then you'll go up to the head, and you'll be like, okay, wait, that's too big. Why is it like that? So I usually draw my heads first. So I don't know. I saw that you kind of did the same thing when you're thinking about how like wide the shoulders are and you're like going down. Is that just really a process of making lines to try and find where, okay, I think that this is where the shoulders would be, and they got the broad shoulders or something?
It would be it. Some of it's pareidolia. Like it's. I have enough experience with it to make some marks, and if they're pretty close, or if they don't look right, I go, oh. It's almost like, so here we go. In this frame, we got a smiley face. Okay. And in this frame, that doesn't quite work as a smiley face.
Right.
There you go, oof. So what I'm doing is I'm taking and using as much pareidolia, how my brain does pattern making. And if I start out with something like a decent pattern, a certain decent placement that it's already got some pretty good familiarity with, I can start to adjust from there and fix and mix and so on.
Okay.
So, so yeah, I'm just as I say, part of I think what art becomes intimidating because it's got this reputation for masters who are thinking and crying all the time, and they've got they're doing everything by candlelight, and you it's there's a romantic image of the extraordinary pain of being an artist and how difficult it is, whereas really it's trying to find the easiest method to get to where you want to be, which is sometimes usually pretty time intensive, but it's like I want to see a drawing there's a thing, even if you find work in a studio, there will often be a sense that if you haven't suffered, your work isn't worth it somehow. If you aren't in a sweat and it doesn't take you 12 weeks to do something. Um, if you can do it in an afternoon and it's super easy, that's the way to go. So it's like, in a way, I'm just trying to find the opportunities to how I look around, how I build patterns, and just use those to advantage, not try to be an artist in some romantic sense or old timey, this is what we do and this is how hard it is, but rather, what's the easiest way to do this? I just want, I want to see some images. I want to get to where I need to go. I want the audience to get there. And if I can do it fast, that's fantastic. And one of the ways is pareidolia, your brain's built-in way of trying to sort out patterns and pattern recognition. So wherever possible, try to do things by the easiest route. Is going to be hard enough as it is. No need to make it more difficult.
Right. Okay.
And after all that squiggling, I'm getting rid of most of it and just leaving accents. Again, that's something I've got to get past because that is not super efficient, but it helps for now. Do you, when I'm working on this, are you getting the sense that, which I hope I get across, that this is no big deal? That in other words, me doing it is no big deal. Hopefully the end result of what you see will be interesting or somehow worthwhile. But I think a thing that comes up in a lot of art is the romanticism around the artist. Like I'm a big opponent of art appreciation because it's like art appreciation is a process of you being informed of the artist's life and history, their background, to affiliate you, to make you sympathetic. And then when you see their work, you get a false sense of, oh, I understand a deeper part of this. That salesmanship. The work should stand alone. Like if there was never a thing where you ever saw who I was and you saw the work, that should be what carries forward. So I think with a lot of the things around, like trying to overemphasize the difficulty, rarity, and all that, turns into just trying to build saints out of people, personality cults, and things along those lines, which don't really help, especially students, understand what it is they're getting into.
Okay. Yeah. No, I definitely I see it as like this is the sketch. Like not so much as like like you were saying. I think that that's more of like an artsy thing. Which I'm not entirely interested in. I think a lot of professors that I have are more into the artsy side, and I'm more of the it's a person that you
Yeah.
draw, and hopefully it's a good person that you draw. But no, I see the idea that you're like that you're building. It's a lot easier to see it than like hearing about it. For me, like I'm a visual learner, so like when I get told like, "Oh yeah, just do this." I'm like, "Okay, how do
Well,
I do that?"
a thing I'd always recommend is when you're starting out an image, um, wide, broad strokes, not follow, like you'd mentioned earlier a little bit about, uh, how when you're drawing a head, it doesn't match the body. To me, that might signal that you're getting into detail too fast, that you're you've invested a lot of time in a part that's separate from other parts. You've started to build the thing you want to see most, but haven't coordinated it with the entirety.
Right.
And that can that can sometimes misdirect and lead you to be frustrated with your work. So there is a thing where it's like, I believe in following impatience as a good thing, but also take like, even again, time box it, take a few minutes to fight against the impatience and quickly scribble something that will show relationships, that'll show like how this piece fits with this piece, and then you can close it. You can then better determine what you want to do and where you want to go, once you're able to see that, okay, these things relate. I'm not going to have to go back in later and readjust them too much. These are a good start.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely, I won't lie. I definitely spend a lot of time doing details on the head, and then I move out because I'm not used to, this is a weird thing to say. I'm not used to sketching. I'm used to starting from like the eyeball of something and then going out and filling up the space. That's how I do my traditional art. It's
Yeah, no,
very bad, and I've been yelled at a lot. And I'm trying to stop doing that, but it ends up that I spend a lot of time on the head of whatever it is to make sure that that's proportionally accurate to what I want it to be. And then when I get to the body, I'm like, oh boy. So then I try to balance it out with how large the head is or how small the head is, and I usually end up failing. There are some pieces I've done that it works out, but I think it's more of a luck thing, not a, oh, I thought this through. It's more like, okay, this finger is this big, so that means the hand is probably this big. Um, but okay, I definitely see what you mean though, of just sketching out and doing a whole body instead of like spending time, because yeah, I definitely do that.
Well, when they're yelling at you about that, do they explain why, what the problems are going to be? Because that helps. Like, saying don't do that isn't necessarily going to inform you of anything. The main problem with, like, and it's how most, so it isn't a wrong thing that you're doing to start out with the eye. Okay, that's one of the things where it's like, sometimes it's not a bug, it's a feature. You're actually going over how people look at faces. You're trying to draw how people look at faces, and you're reproducing it with lines. Okay, so people look at faces and they start with one eye. They derive a lot of information from that one eye, jump to the other eye, and so on. So you're not coming up with wrong information. You're not at a wrong start. Um, the problem is there's a lot of framework that exists around that before you start to piece together what the eye is. Okay, so there's a lot of groundwork there that the eye, when you see an eye and you're already determining stuff about it, you're already aware it's in a frame of a face that's on top of a body that has all these other things. So the part that makes it more difficult and impatient is you want to see the thing that's the point of focus. You want to see the interesting stuff. Where's somebody going, what are the tells of their character, and so on. But in order to do that, you do have to build the context of the entire entity. And it's the part that your brain actually doesn't pay much attention to, because it just does a quick pass and goes, yeah, fine. So it does become a thing where it's like, okay, even though I'm impatient and want to get there, I do still have to do this thing. Otherwise, my ability to discern a pattern won't be fulfilled, because I jumped a step. So it'll then cause you to create like really not helpful distortions. Instead of deliberate leading distortions, it'll be distortions because you focused on one thing, and then you'll start to orbit out further and further in proportion around it. So so it has some predictable problems, and it's a predictable reason it's happening, and it can help you understand how your audience is going to see it. So it's like, the idea to focus on this one part is actually a good, valid idea, but it is you jumping in the role of the audience instead of the artist, and
Okay.
it'll mislead you and spin you out. So it's still useful. It's just maybe in the wrong sequence.
Okay.
It's interesting though, because I've never met actually anyone who starts their drawing with the eyeball. So it's intriguing to me. Like, Natalie, what's your thought process when you're starting your sketches or drawings with the eyeball?
So I usually, if I'm using a reference image, I'll look at the eye and I'll go, okay, how big do I want this eye to be? And I'll stand back from the paper. I'll be like, okay, if I make the eye this big, then the rest of the thing is gonna fit on the paper probably here. And I'm like,
So
okay, and then I just get on the ground and I draw a circle for the eye, and then I spread out, and then I just shade, and that's how I make my bodies.
no, because that would like lead you to wasting a lot of time later on fixing stuff. If you're working in a industry environment, let's say if you're working on a game character and you have like a timeline of hypothetically a week to design the first draft of the character. If you start with your eyeball, unless you're using that eyeball as a unit of measurement, it will lead you to wasting way more time fixing the rest of the body of the character based on that eyeball than it would save you time to do, like, think of your character as blocks. Even if you're
That's
doing the eyeball first, think of the eyeball as a block. Like, don't think about any of the, I know like shading and detail is fun stuff, but it will save you a lot of headache when you start working in like a studio environment if you kind of develop the practice of thinking in terms of blocks and shapes first.
That's actually something I've struggled with for a long time. I can't see the shapes. I've studied for probably 2 years of I have books and references that tell me that bodies are shapes, and I've tried to draw shapes. I don't see it. I really have. I've looked so much to try and understand that a chest is like a cube, and then you connect the cylinders to the cube, and you go from there, or you can like do other stuff, and I just don't see it. Every single time I've used it, I either don't understand where things are supposed to be, and I get lost. The drawing that I actually sent you, Paul, that was the third attempt after like giving up on shapes because I tried to do other ones with the shapes, and when I stepped back after starting to fill the detail, it was like all wrong. There was nothing in the right place, not one spot that was actually near each other, and so then
What if
I
they're,
panicked.
what if they're instead of shapes? Sometimes,
Patterns.
yeah, and also curves. You can
Yeah.
also use curvatures, like basically saying, okay, here's the bowl of the pelvis, here's the
Okay.
coastal region of the ribs, here's the way ribs go. Basically setting up a bunch of circles,
Okay.
almost like a connect the dots.
Yeah.
You can that can also be used as a method too. So what you're describing there is a type of pattern recognition.
Okay.
And it maybe you want to, so if you think of things like contrast, like this, contrast, uh, I'll do something just simple. Um, Value, um, uh, we can go from there. But these are escalating patterns in how the hierarchy of the visual cortex, basically greater and greater complexity to resolve an image, go. Okay, a lot of art properties and art principles are sorting out the hierarchy of the visual context. You're going out from very simple patterns and very simple information to complex things, facial expression, color, motion, synchrony, all these things. Sometimes instead of doing it so it's like a major thing like that, just two or three things, angles at certain positions can give you a lot of information.
Okay.
and they can also save you time. So instead of getting to necessarily planes, you can start out with lines and then escalate to planes and then three-dimensional shaping and so on and so forth. The angle
Okay.
of the cube can act, the angle of your curve rather, can help indicate to you where you want to go.
My question though is like, how do you know, like, what's in relation to it? Like, so when I look at pictures, I see, um, I don't see lines. I see like, I see the absolute dark, and then I see that the shape that the dark creates. So like the light areas I see, and then I see them overlaid on a dark area. So I'm like, okay, these light areas are here, the dark areas here, and then I just make the dark areas so that I can have the light areas. So I don't use lines.
So you're seeing contrast then, right?
Yeah, and that's how I determine where stuff is.
Okay.
So then when I try to translate them into lines, I think I have issues with understanding if the lines are the dark parts or if they're like inside of the light parts.
There may be a thing where you want to step backward a bit because what that you're jumping to the end picture almost with that. You're at an advanced part of the development of a drawing with that. The earlier stages of that are basically figuring out architecture. You know, you're what are light and dark describing? So light and dark are descriptions of light hitting a thing or not hitting a thing, you know, where light is landing and where it can't reach. What is the object that light's landing on? You know, what are its main curve, line, corner, and intersections? So it's like when I draw this guy, here's some intersections, here's a boundary, and what I'm doing is I'm describing the architecture. You know, I'm saying that these pieces overlap, these pieces connect, this is the end part of one thing and the beginning part of another. um, those things on what it is that light is interacting with need to be understood first.
Okay.
What's the object being lit? Because what it sounds like is it sounds like you're um, using light, you're you're putting light on something and you're using light as the descriptor, and it's like light is on something and you want to work on the thing that what is it on, kind of.
Okay. That makes
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay.
And
Also, another thing. Sorry, Paul. Go on.
well, go ahead, please.
No, because I used to have when I started classical drawing. The
Mhm.
one of the things that I learned is how to see, because when we're looking in normal day-to-day life versus how when we're looking at a model or when we're looking at a thing that we want to draw, it's very different about how to, so you have to learn how to look and how to see in order to be able to recognize those patterns. So I think something that might help you, Natalie, is if you find it challenging to look at a human body in terms of blocks, don't worry about looking at as blocks. Instead, see when you're looking at it, let's say the model is being lit, so look at what kind of shapes that light is forming.
Mm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be like blocks. It could be like, oh, this elbow part here looks like a spaceship, but then, or this part looks like a parallelogram or like a crescent moon or something. So that way it'll help you to understand better how to look.
Okay, that actually helps a lot. I never thought to do shapes like that. Okay.
Because even like Paul, could you pull up that Santa drawing that you had,
Sure.
please?
Why are you yelling at me?
No.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's just the mic part.
No, I'm just teasing. Just teasing you. Do
Okay.
you want to see the diagram part or the just raw image?
The diagram part, please.
Okay. Is that one working?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Okay, so look at in this image, if you were to start with his eyes, it would be really complex to draw the rest of him because
Right.
there's so much like character to the character itself. But instead, if you're looking at this image, an easy way, so like if the image is being lit from, I assume, screen right. Is that correct, Paul? Like
Yeah, it's
from,
got a major light source kind of arcing here, a
yeah.
more diffuse one. Yep.
So if you look at this image, can you see the different shapes that the shading itself is making? Ignore the
Yes.
hard lines.
Now, I see such, I guess, small shapes though, and I don't know if that would almost.
No, don't worry about the small shapes. Focus on the bigger objects, the bigger shapes, because at this
Okay.
point you only need to, initially when you're doing your sketch, you're focusing, go from like big to small,
Okay.
because the smaller the detail, that can be added later on, because when you're working in a studio environment, in your first draft there is guaranteed changes that's going to happen. So you don't
Right.
want to put in all the detail and waste your time when you're doing the initial stage of the character.
Okay. I see what you mean.
So in this case, if you look at it in forms of shapes, so like for example, his face as a shape without, like, ignore the nose and the eyes and the glasses and all of that. If you look at just the bulk of the shape, it almost looks like um, it could look like a a piece of like fuzz,
Right.
like cotton candy, for example.
Okay. I see that.
So think of the object in those terms where you're creating, they don't have to be standard blocks of shapes, just create the shapes that resonate better with you understanding what the object looks like. But don't
Okay.
focus on the details, because the way that you're building your characters right now, you're starting from stage 8 and going back to stage 1, when it should be
Right.
from like stage 1 to stage 8.
That makes a lot
Does
of
that
sense.
make sense?
Yeah, like that probably answers all my problems. I mean, because I that's just, I don't know how I picked up on it. It's probably, I don't know. I don't know how I picked up on that, but yeah, like I had tried shapes when I was in high school, and then it just never resonated with me. And I think one of the methods my teacher taught me was to like to just do the shading, and it worked. And I didn't think about it until this instant, because that's actually how I do have done all my pieces in my classes. And that particular teacher that I have had um hasn't really said anything. He just said it was a weird way to do it. um but
No,
okay.
your school owes you both money back. Honestly, like
Yeah,
if you
I
had the
agree.
option, change schools.
It's
No,
basically
for
their
real.
job to it's their job to basically tell you what we've just
Yeah.
been telling you over the last couple of minutes. So
Okay.
it isn't like this is and there it is part of their job to also analyze and help you out with where you're at. It isn't just a thing where it's like go do. They're not delegating. They have to be hand in hand.
Yeah.
They're literally supposed to be invested in your good outcomes and your knowledge. So it's like just saying go draw this, or that drives me crazy that they should definitely try to understand where you're coming from, give you
Yeah.
alternatives, and explain the value of those alternatives. That's I'm going to your school and yell at some people. No, I'm
For
only
I
real,
will
you
yell
should
at
like
some.
write a review.
Like, oh gosh. Okay.
We'll
Yeah, no,
support the action.
yeah, yeah. it's it's just like because Naomi's taking the same class right now, and it just, we don't get real structure back. And I've had that same professor before, and he was my first drawing professor when I came into college, and so I didn't really get a, I guess, a fix for my problems, and so now 2 years later, here we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's
No.
expensive. Like school isn't cheap
Yeah.
for like any kind of program that you're doing, whether it's game animation or regular like film animation or
And for
whatever.
me, that's the infuriating part. That there's
Yeah.
also things like a thing, and I'm running a little over if you guys don't mind me
No
tangent
worries.
second. One of the things that, so there is a thing with the art schools where they're preparing you to work in industries. That's a conflict of interest. The industries themselves are not always art friendly, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the lawsuit that happened a few years ago with a number of the movie studios working against the interests of artists to keep their pay low. And it actually went to the Supreme Court in to because what they were doing is they were coordinating to keep pay down for artists. Artists also can now, especially with the technology that's popping up, be their own business, become a studio with a small number of people. Um, it's knowledge based as opposed to huge technology based. It uses technology, obviously, but it's a thing that should be taught. There should be an aspect of going to art school that teaches you how to develop courage, how to interact in a business sense as an artist, not an artist imitating other business models and marketing and doing these things, but the terms that are driven by art and art's particular special value and business value. They're not going over that. They're not teaching how to push back against industries or how to stand up and keep your expertise as a valuable part in either a game studio or a VFX house because it's highly valuable economically to the studio itself to not suppress art ideas. There's tons of levels of uh, art pieces, not just the how to do art, but how to send you out in the world that give you arm you with preparation that isn't being done. And it's in some cases collaborating in corners where you might not, this may be against your interest. There may be parts where they should be teaching you how to innovate, create new businesses. Part of art is just the nature of it is exploration and discovery. We're at the forefront of all of that. State of the art is not a just casual term. Technology comes from the Greek word techne, which is art. Um, we are at the forefront of thinking and always have been. And it's an area where it's like, I've heard the term that art is a service industry. It certainly isn't. It's demonstrably not. We lead, we are not a product or a service. We fit in this other range. And these things need to be brought forward and taught to you how to present them to businesses, how to negotiate with businesses, or how to stand alone and be a parallel business that can interact with other businesses. And these aren't things that happen. It's not even a discussion except maybe on the peripheries here and there. That's a great loss because, like, one of the things I've run into as an art director or being a mentor to artists is, hey, you're going to be running into studios that are not necessarily your friends. You're going to be running into professional environments that actually seem suicidal in how much they damage themselves. And there's tactics like psychological warfare between different departments and disciplines in a business for the sake of bonuses. So it's like if you're in a game studio, you may be in active competition in the art department against the design department for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And there are studios that will pit you against each other. There are studios where the game design department will actually be gaming the rest of the studio. There are real issues that artists need to be informed of so that they can interact, squash some of this weird psychological warfare and superstition, be able to present themselves as fully dignified, not flippy eccentrics, but actually laser focused, not what the laser focused and highly technical and super smart. Not that you could tell from razor focused, but I think you get the idea. That we can actually come in and contribute in any number of unexplored ways. So I think that it isn't just that the schools are doing a disservice by not teaching you the full range of technically what you should know and know in terms of building your craftsmanship quickly and relieving everybody of the stresses of uncertainties around uh, imposter syndrome or the anxieties that make your pictures last forever or not being able to close out a thing. Those are important things. Craftsmanship are important things, but also how you're going to interact and how you can prepare to innovate. Um, there's real losses there. Again, I don't know what the fix would be, but keep your eyes open and be cautious. Aren't I cheery? Aren't I?
No, but I feel like it's really important for students to know these things, because once you're out in the real world, it's way different than what a protected school atmosphere is like.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that the students need to know is keep your ego outside the studio
Mm.
and do not take any kind of critique personally. Because there will be times where you'll be like asked to redraw something like 10 times before the client approves it. And then at the end of it, they'll be like, oh yeah, but the time that you did this drawing version 25, and now we're at drawing version 80, and the client wants to go back to drawing version 25.
Well, you
And
know what?
those are the things that students don't normally know when they're in school.
With that, I'd actually offer a different idea around that, sort of related, but a bit different. Is one, being able to speak with clients and help guide them is like doing contract stuff. That's been one of my major things. Is not just um, this is what the client wants, go do it. But wait a minute, it's like you don't go into a brain surgeon and go, hey, I wanted this and a that. You go, I need some consultation and advice. And you go, good. I happen to be an expert in this range. So I think there also needs to be a thing where um, critique needs to be adjusted a bit, because oftentimes people are critiquing at first pass. So there's a problem in seeing art. When you see something at first, there's much more that you're projecting onto what you're seeing than what is actually the thing you're seeing. A lot of it is, a cognitive bias, and it takes 2 or 3 days to work out what you're actually seeing. So it's like when you get critiques or even change lists or things like that, they should have some built-in criteria on the part of the people offering changes as well. I think artists should expect that it's like, hey, sometimes you don't get the best descriptions, the briefs are not clear. It's an important lesson to learn or a skill to acquire, to sort out and be able to drag out from people what it is they want, or help discern that if they don't want anything, they're not actually asking for anything, and you need to send it back to them and go, when you get an idea, I can help you out. But for now, you don't actually have an idea, and I can't build a shopping line for you to shop with because I'm just a member of the human race. I can only do so much as myself. But you can actually push back and say, hey, are you thinking of something here, or you have a vague notion? Because the vague notion is going to make my timeline crazy, and you're going to be spending a ton of money on me trying to guess and be a fortune teller to what you haven't sorted out. If they have sorted it out and there is clear criteria, then I think it's like you can start to compare the criteria and do critiques or comparative analysis and say, how close are we to what we're looking at? So I think there's where I would differ, is that the responsibility of the artist to keep chasing a thing instead of them asking the artist and going, hey, maybe we aren't communicating this right. What would you suggest? Using the expertise and direct conversation. Sometimes where there's a producer or another intermediary who neither speaks the client's language nor the artist's language. Whereas if these two were put together, they could sort it out easily, is also a problem. There's sometimes strange hierarchies and information that also need to be challenged and sorted. I don't know. What do you think on that, Purva?
I agree with that 100% because that person of who the intermediary between the client and the technical team or the creative team, I'm most of the time that person. And so we sometimes get briefs where it's like a one-line brief. Even from like big companies or big clients, they'll be like, okay, we're planning to do this launch for like, for example, they had like Christmas launches coming up last year. And the brief was to create 3 commercials for that particular brand. And they wanted characters to be used from their upcoming like games that they were bringing up. And they're like, okay, yeah, these are the 3 characters that we want to use, and we need to create 3 commercials. And that was the brief. There was no sense of like, so then we had to present to them concepts to approve from. But then once the concept was approved, after the final approval, they decided to add 2 more concepts to it, but the same timeline.
What company is this? Go ahead and tell us.
No, I can't because of the NDA. But yeah, but it's like, like that sort of thing happens all the time. And that kind of puts a different kind of pressure on the artist. Because when you're planning your project timelines, if an artist is given the timeline, let's say you have like 3 weeks to create 3 videos, commercials for these characters, and then the character needs to be animated a specific way that the client wants it to like show all its features and stuff. So in that sense, they were like, okay, we have 3 weeks to do three videos, but then we ended up doing 12 videos in 3 weeks because they wanted to do 2 additional concepts to be broadcast after the first set of commercials was done. And so when that happens, it's like the artists again are being burnt out by that point, because most of the times all the artists are working on multiple projects. They're not just working on like one project at a time. So I think it's important for schools to inform of the students of those things, of how well would they perform on multiple projects under that kind of pressure.
And equally, I think it should be responsibilities of studios of all sorts to make sure that information they're handing down the line isn't that they need to enforce some will and understand that, hey,
100%.
Being subservient to a client it may flatter the client, but it's a disaster.
It's a very poor culture. It's a very poor culture.
And things would go so much better if it was like, hey, we'll guide you on this. Let me tell you, I can see that you're having some issues figuring this out, and we can help you figure this out.
Yeah.
And we can prepare downstream this cascading pipeline and workflow and all the other great terms. We can help you sort that out so that you're paying a reasonable fee for what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we can do the best thing that we can do, which helps our reputation. So we get paid reasonably. We can probably open up timelines to do 3 times the work. And our work is awesome instead of being compromised by kludge.
Yeah. And it's also like they have, like, at least for this particular project, it was so close to Christmas and most of the team was going on vacation or like taking their time off. So it's like you're already limited by the crew that you have, and then you're like overtaxing them in terms of how much they can do in a given point of time.
Yes, and I think that is a real, and I think that's a real misunderstanding of the value of art also. That I think starts to lean into the art is just there to make pretty instead of like some of the things that we were describing earlier. There's this huge world behind art and these effects
Yeah.
behind, and this is basically like the least valuable part of it. It's like where art could be, and art business and industry could be this much more extensive, wide ranging, and polished thing. Instead, it becomes like a thing where it's like, well, we'll just cover it over. It'll be fine. And it's like, I hear somebody who
Least
doesn't know what
favorite
art is.
line
Yeah, it'll be
is
fine.
like fix it in post. Yeah. It's like
That
fix it in post, or like it'll be fine. And I'm like, no, like, why are you expecting it to be fixed it in post to begin with? Like, don't aim for that.
Fix it in post means that somebody didn't think it through at the start.
Yeah.
And that is, actually though, with like some of the real time production that's going on, I know that has to be curbed. There have to be things thought of in advance and prepared, which actually has me kind of encouraged. It's like, oh, look at that, a mechanism that you actually have to think about because the post doesn't exist in the same way. So it's like, oh, neat. Let's see where this goes. Anyhow, everybody, I'm gonna let everybody go, and thank you for joining me in this and listening to me ramble and rant. And thanks, Purva, for adding a great deal of information there. That was perfect.
You're welcome. No worries. This was really a great conversation and a great session. Thank you so much, Paul, for your time and for your talents and sharing the information.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, and thanks, Natalie, for letting us work with some ideas with you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. You guys have a nice day.
You too. Bye-bye.
You too, everyone. Bye.